Okay, so we'll get started, and people will just join as we go. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on how to improve running performance and reduce injury risk. We've got a treat in store for you tonight. We've got a host of speakers, and at the end of the webinar, we've got a special treat for all the attendees, and we'll announce it right at the end. So stay tuned for that. So just for some housekeeping rules before we start. We're going to allocate time for questions at the end of the webinar. So please write your questions in the chat feature at the bottom, and then we'll get through as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. And if we don't answer your question, we'll endeavour to answer it via email. So the running order for this evening will be as follows. Rory will run through common running injuries. Louise will then run through training principles and injury prevention. Myself, Luigi, I'll run through some screening. Tremayne is going to run through our running coach assessment and give you some tips and hints. And then George will run through biomechanics of the feet. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Rory, and he'll give you the rundown on common running injuries, and he'll kind of give you some guidance on what we see frequently in clinic and what to look out for.
Great, thanks Luigi. Yeah, my name is Rory. I'm physio working in A.L.O physio clinic. So here's just some of the common injuries that we see. So really common one we see in the clinic is something called iliotibial band syndrome. So also called runner's knee. So it's just characterized by kind of a sharp pain at the outside of your knee, especially when you're heel striking and when running long distances or downhill and even walking downstairs. And people at risk of kind of developing this are really beginner runners, anyone with a hip or lower limb weakness, people who've had a history of ITB injury before, or anyone with quite a high weekly mileage as well. Another thing that we see quite often in the clinic, again, especially with beginner runners, is something called shin splints. When you're experiencing this, you get some pain around the kind of shin area, so the bottom of the lower leg. Pain can persist for hours or even up to kind of 48 hours after exercise, and really just generally pain with running or even fast walking if it's a little bit achy. People at risk of this, a little bit more common in females. Anyone with a history of shin splints, definitely more likely to see it again, and anyone with a bit of weakness around the calf or lower limb in general. Anyone who's a bit overweight with a high BMI, or anyone who's got a large increase in their activity levels. So plantar fasciopathy, very stubborn one that we would have seen a lot of in the clinic as well. Really is just a kind of a gradual onset of heel pain. You usually see it when you're kind of running after a run, and then maybe start to notice it when you're walking or standing. And the kind of hallmark sign is intense heel pain during the kind of first few steps after waking, or if you've been sitting down at the desk for a long time. Usually people in their kind of mid 40s to early 60s would be a bit more common. Foot biomechanics can definitely come into play and put you at greater risk, and anyone who's got a bit of Achilles or calf tightness, and again is a little bit more overweight, or really any kind of big changes in activity or load is going to put you at risk of developing this condition. So another one we'd see usually people who maybe run for training and then also play other sports like football or basketball. So pain when running, really usually at the front of the knee, although it can be anywhere. And you'd often see it when people are landing from a jump or squatting or kneeling as well. Again, similar risk factors with this one, just muscle weakness, previous injury history, and anyone with excessive weight. And we would usually see it in adolescents a lot more than adults, and women are kind of twice as likely to get it more than men. So Achilles tendinopathy, looking so more towards the kind of middle distance or short distance runners now. Morning pain is really a classic symptom with this. You usually have a bit of muscle weakness and a bit of wasting around the calf muscle, usually with stiff around the ankle, and there's tenderness to touch. Anyone who's again overweight or has some vascular issues is a bit more at risk, and again anyone with diabetes or long-term steroid use, and anyone who's increased their activity levels. So finally, hamstring injuries is something we see quite a lot of, and usually more so in sprinters and middle distance runners as well. We've got Usain Bolt here, who's just torn his hamstring after doing his final ever race, And usually what you would see again is people with sudden onset of pain at the back of the thigh. If it's a bit more severe, you could have swelling, bruising, and weakness around the hamstring. And if it, again, a bit more severe, you could even feel a kind of a popping sensation in the back of the leg. Anyone who sprints really is at a risk of developing hamstring strain. Sprinting, accelerating, decelerating, any change in directions is going to put you at risk. Eccentric strength asymmetries, which I think Luigi will touch on, will put you at a greater risk. So you need to watch out for that. And anyone with a hamstring injury in the past, or anyone who's a little bit older, at a greater risk of getting a hamstring injury. So yeah, just a very kind of quick overview of what we'd see a lot of in clinic. And I'll pass you on to Louise now, who can kind of go through how to prevent them.
Great, thanks, Rory. Hello, everyone. I'm Louise. I'm one of the other physios working in A.L.O physiotherapy clinic. So Rory's kind of talked to you about like specific risk factors for certain injuries. What I'm going to go through is some modifiable factors that we can actually control and reduce your injury or your risk of injury. So I've broken that down into kind of three main topics. So we've got overtraining, rapid change in your training program, and any weaknesses or abnormal biomechanics. So looking at overtraining, so this can happen when we have like inadequate recovery, and also outside stresses as well can increase your risk of developing overtraining. And obviously this can have a massive impact on your performance and your training program or plan. So what are the signs and symptoms you need to look out for? So number one, your rest and heart rate is really important. So hopefully a lot of you will have a means of monitoring this, and getting to know what's normal for you is really important. So after a hard session, it's normal to see an elevation in your rest and heart rate. But if that persists and is consistently 3 to 5 beats above normal, it can be a sign that you're overtraining. Also then, other signs and symptoms are a drop or a plateau in your performance, body taking longer to recover, you've aches and cramps, a lack of interest or motivation in training, frequently feeling run down, trouble sleeping, and difficulty concentrating. So what can we do to avoid this? So as I said before, monitoring your heart rate is really important. So if you can, keep an eye on that, and then before you go, like say after a long run, keep an eye on it again and just give yourself time for that to recover before doing another hard session. Prioritizing your rest days, allowing at least 48 hours between your hard sessions. So this is your longer runs, but also like your interval training and tempo runs as well. Making sure you're getting good sleep, nutrition. So especially if you're doing a lot of mileage, really important to make sure you're getting enough calories in to meet your energy demands, but also good nutritious food and a good amount of protein as well to help with your recovery. Plenty of hydration, and then massage and things like that to assist with recovery. So if we move on then to your training program, so what should this look like? So it's a good idea at the start of the season to have a look at what are the main races that you want to prioritize, and developing a plan that you gradually increase your volume and decrease coming up right before the event. So never increase your volume more than 20% per week. So you really should plan this out appropriately. The 80 to 20 rule. So this suggests that 80% of your training should be at a more moderate intensity and only 20% at that higher intensity. Again, as I mentioned before, so if you're coming up to a race and you want to either work on your distance or speed, really just picking one of them at a time and working on that before you increase something else. So never increase more than one at the same time. And really important for all runners is incorporating strength work into your plan. So why is strength work important? So if we just kind of look at the muscle groups that we use as we run, so You've got your glutes, your hamstrings, and your calves to help with propelling you forward, giving you that power. Your core muscles then work on maintaining stability and reducing excessive rotation at the trunk. So if we've got excessive rotation going on in the upper body, we can get a knock-on effect down in the lower limb, which Tremayne will kind of discuss this a little bit more later on. And then again, as we land, we've got our glutes to help stabilize the pelvis, and then the thigh and calf muscles help to support the force of the body as we land. So if we've got weakness anywhere along this chain, we can end up getting either one, our performance isn't going to be optimized, but then over time, you may find that you will get like any injuries or weaknesses. So for example, say if you look, if we just go back to that, if we look at, say, like, if, for example, if you've got any weakness around your hips or hamstrings, you might find you don't have that power to push off, which might mean either like you're running slower, or it could be that you're overusing your calf muscles and relying on them a lot. So that could, over time, show up as an injury in the calf muscle, or say at the hip itself at that site of weakness. So it's really important to look at everyone individually and figure out what exactly is the root of that cause. But Tremayne will also kind of discuss a bit more about biomechanics and how that has a link with your muscle weakness. So one of the main questions we get asked in clinic is, what type of exercises should I be doing as a runner? So this is really difficult to kind of give one size fits all for everybody, because everybody's different. We all have different running styles. But as a general rule of thumb, if we kind of work on them main muscle groups that we use during running, so your glutes, core, thigh and calf, and then having a mixture of different exercises. So you've got your multi-joint exercises, single joint, and plyometric exercise. So I'll just have some videos that we'll go through. So first video is, this is an example of a multi-joint exercise. So this is a single leg squat. So here we're using our hips, our ankles, our knees. So it's really nice functional exercise that also works on control as well as strength. However, you might find that, you know, here we're using a bit more with glutes and thigh. We're not really loading the calf. So for example, our calf muscles take 6 to 8% of our body weight during running. So making sure we're also doing some more targeted exercises as well, so that we adequately load the muscle to ensure we're getting the same kind of load as we're running. So here's just simple single leg calf raise. I just have a backpack on here, so it just shows, like, if you don't have weights and things at home, throw a rucksack on, throw a few books in it, and you can increase the weight as well. And then if we look at the plyometric exercises, so this is working on like your force production and speed. So it's all about like the tendon elasticity and what gives us that power. So these are like your quick, fast-paced exercises. Again, here is just working on the calf muscle. So also, as we age, the ability for our tendons, they become less elastic, so they can produce the force and speed as quick as normal. So really, in our older population as well, really like keep focusing on your plyometric exercise can be really beneficial. So obviously that's just kind of an overview. Getting a tailored plan for every individual is really important. And Luigi, I'm going to pass on to now. He's just going to talk about different screening we have in the clinic to assess your strength, your power, and can also determine if you've got asymmetries between either side, and show you kind of what exercise you need to be working on, whether that's plyometric or strength. So I'll pass you on to Luigi now.
Perfect. Thank you, Louise. Okay, so we're just going to go through what is screening. So it's a process to collect meaningful data regarding your present state, so where you are now. We can collect it pre-competition or pre-training block or anywhere along the line in the process. If you've kind of already started a training block, we can pick you up halfway through if you're struggling to progress and assess you there. It can be used as a baseline to work from, and if your injury occurs during the training process or during competition, we can use that baseline to kind of get back to and get to the same level that you were at previously. That baseline would indicate whether you've achieved kind of your previous range, whether you achieved your strength or power markers. And it's probably a good idea at that point to try to push past that baseline to minimize the reoccurrence of any injury. So screening at A.L.O. comprises of a subjective assessment to establish your current state and get a better understanding of your past medical history, including any previous injuries you've had, which is always a big indicator of kind of future injuries. We also assess for fundamental movement qualities through the kinetic chain in the form of an objective assessment. So this includes active and passive ranges of movement, strength, any special tests that we deem appropriate, and then a functional movement screen. So the real question is, does screening work to reduce injury risk? And in order to answer the question, we first need to understand that musculoskeletal injuries result from a complex non-linear interaction between multiple factors. So basically that means that there's multiple things that can impact whether you picked up an injury. Okay, so these factors can be classified either as modifiable and non-modifiable. So the non-modifiable factors are age, gender, ethnicity, and training history. And then the modifiable factors, which Louise has already touched on, are the strength, your muscle tendon morphology, your diet, your training intensity, and your frequency. And in order to reduce injury risk, we need to manipulate those modifiable factors in your favor. This gives you the best chance of reducing injury risk. And again, Louise has spoken about how to increase training safely. What we can do at A.L.O. is maximize the benefits of training by getting an insight into any asymmetries or deficits you have through kind of our vowed human performance screening process. So our vowed human performance screening incorporates the items that you see on your screen here. So from left to right, we've got the Nord board, which assesses your hamstring health. So that's ideal if you've had past history of hamstring injuries, assess where your left is compared to your right, see if there's any asymmetry in there, see where you compare to normative data. Are you below or above average? And if so, what can we work on? In the middle of your screen, you've got the force frame, which we use to screen a number of different joints and muscle groups. And these are at your ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, and neck. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, we've got force depths, which we use to assess jump performance, strength, and power production, whilst also allowing us to assess asymmetries in compound movements, such as your squats. The force depths will also provide an insight into your dynamic strength index. So Rory, go through and play that video that we were just about to play for us. So you'll see it in action on screen now. So yeah, it will give us an insight into your dynamic strength index, which can then be used to target your training plan accordingly to whether you need to improve your strength, your power, or a combination of both, depending on where you sit on that dynamic strength index. All three systems allow for data to be collected with ease and speed. They allow for kind of instant real-time data to be seen, as you see there on kind of the handheld device. They also allow us to monitor athletes over time and therefore leverage insights into your historical data to make more informed decisions about where you're going with your training plan. This is done via the Health Hub, which stores all your data centrally, and therefore we can compare across time. In addition to this, we have access to normative data, which I touched on previously, and that shows us where you sit in comparison to other athletes in your population. The asymmetries and deficits can be addressed with a bespoke training plan, like Louise has touched on as well, and that will be provided by our kind of experts in-house. Our VALD screen complements the work of our next speaker, and therefore I'm going to hand over to Tremayne to talk you through what he does as a running coach. And again, I'd advise to listen very astutely to Tremayne. He's got some good points and tips that you might be able to take away and implement almost immediately And don't forget to stay tuned to the end. We've got a little gift for everyone. So I'll hand over to you now, Tremayne.
Thank you, Luigi. Just going to share my screen. Right. Turn it off. Can you see my screen okay? Cool.
Yeah, you can.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to talk about running analysis and running efficiency. So I'm going to take you through the process from the analysis to improving the running technique, and then to performing and integrating that technique in your sport. So the analysis, in the analysis, we get you on the treadmill, and we'll look at two different focuses. So how we can prevent injury, and then how can we improve efficiency. So with the first part, we're looking at how to prevent injury. We'll look at things that you're doing technically that may be causing you injury. You might be running and feeling a pain in your hamstring, as an example. But then a lot of the time, if you have an injury in a hamstring, that's not usually your cause. So we'll be looking at what you're doing with your mechanics that is putting stress on your hamstrings. And then when we're looking at how to improve efficiency, we're looking at what you could be doing that is making you use more energy than you need to. There's a lot of, I'll go through a few techniques, I'll show you a few videos as well in a bit, where if you're not using the correct muscles, you end up using a lot more energy, feeling a lot more tired a lot quicker. And then from the analysis, we'll take you through how to improve your technique. So you're using your arms. So using your arms, how to use your arms properly. We'll go through the technique using the right muscles that use that do those particular actions. The arms have a big part to play, which I feel like a lot of people don't use their arms properly, because a lot of people use their arms as a balance, and I'll show you a couple of examples there as well. But the arms actually dictate what the legs do. So if you're rotating side to side, as an example, it can dictate what's going on lower down. And then the legs, being more efficient with the legs, using the correct muscles, using the hip flexors, using the hip extensors to make sure that you're moving across the track, moving across the grass, wherever it is you're doing, you're going from point A to point B as quickly as possible, rather than spending a lot of time in the air and not moving forward. And then the last bit was touching on integrating it into the playing field, into the track, whatever it is you're doing, making sure that what we work on the treadmill actually translates to your sport. So that whether that means going to the park, going onto the track, and making sure that you understand the technique and how to implement it into your field. As I said, so I've touched on this quite a bit. So identifying technical issues that lead to causing injury. So from that, the injury prevention side of it, once we've seen what weaknesses you have, we can then build a program from it. We can then implement the strengthening exercises to make sure that there's very minimal imbalances, and we can use that for your sessions, and we can also use that for you to take home as well. I'm going to move on to that a bit more. So what are common findings when you're running? So you have things like hip drop. So you might be landing, as you see this lady here, you're landing on the left leg, and then you're dropping your hip on the right hand side. And this usually means that it could mean your left glute medius, which is the muscle up here, could be weak, could not be active, and that means you haven't got enough stability to hold your hip up. So we would address things like that. It could be ankle mobility as well, and we've got things like crossover, where you're, again, this lady here is doing the same thing. You're crossing over your feet. It could be overactive adductors. Again, it could be glute med. There's a few things that we look for, but these are the few that are quite common. And then overstriding, I have an example for you as well, where you're landing in front of your center of gravity. So you're trying to gain extra. You might be trying to gain extra stride length, but instead of trying to use your hip extensor to move forward, you're extending your legs out in front and maybe landing on your heel, and that then acts as a braking force. So instead of you landing on your center of gravity and you keep rolling forward, you end up braking and causing more issues to your body. And as I said, what we see here, we will make a program based on your particular issues, niggles, whatever it is. But also, if you get to use the muscles better or correctly, a lot of the time you'll see a change in the mechanics. So where you may have had a hip drop, starting to use your hip flexors better, consciously using the hip flexors better, then that hip drop may not be as obvious. It may adjust itself. We're going to move on to efficiency. So the things that we look at for efficiency is minimizing the rotation of the arms, using the muscles that contribute to shoulder flexion. So a lot of the muscles that do this action, bringing your arm up and forward, are all under your armpit. So we try to use those muscles, try to teach you how to use those muscles properly, so that they are more efficient, as you don't want a lot of rotation. So that's using those muscles will restrict the rotation. Naturally, we're going to rotate, but we try to restrict it. And as I said, with the legs, minimizing air time. You don't want to spend too much time in the air. You don't want to be cycling a lot as well. Although it looks like you're cycling, you moving your hips forward properly will end up giving you that action, but you are then moving forward. And then keeping your hips up and forward. As I said, you're moving from point A to point B as fast as possible. Moving forward rather than up is going to make you get there faster. And then the last bit is the torso. As you see Alison Felix here, I believe she's one of the most efficient runners. Her torso is forward, so it's almost the gravity is taking you. So you're using gravity and you just keep your hips up and you use your hips to move you forward. And again, torso doesn't want to rotate. I'm going to show you through examples now. Right. We're going to start with Rory. So we had Rory jumping on the treadmill. And if we slow it down, one of the things I mentioned was overstriding. So if you have a look here, Rory's landing in front of his center of gravity. He's really overextending his knee, and for me that tells me that he's going to get a lot of calf issues, he's going to get a lot of knee issues, and potentially front of the shin from slapping down here as well. And talking to Rory after we had seen that, he confirmed that was those were a few of the issues that he was having. So you can also see, as he's landing, because he's landing in front of his center of gravity here, if you watch his hips here, you can see they drop for him to then go up to move forward. So he's losing a lot of time, but there's a lot of things that you can see that can be improved on. And then we're going to have a look at the after video. So we worked on a few drills, changed the focus for, I think we spent about 20 minutes on it. And if you watch here already, as he's landing, still landing, I mean, it's 20 minutes of work, but he's still landing in front of his center of gravity. Ooh, wrong pen. So he's still landing in front of his center of gravity, but it's a lot better than it was. Another thing that we noticed is that he found it a lot harder to run slow. So he was running, I think, 10 kilometers an hour in the first video. I'll show you the difference. He's running 10 kilometers an hour in the first video. And so this one here is the first, this is the second. And you can see his leg speed is a lot faster. And it's not because he's trying to run faster, it's because he's becoming more efficient with his arms, more efficient with his legs. And what I forgot to mention is over here, if you look at his arms, he's actually using his arms as a balance, so they're not moving at all. So next one, so I'm going through 3 different types. I'm going through a long distance runner. I'm going to go for a sprinter next, GB International Sprinter. Oh, don't tell me it's not going to work. Ah, man. So that's not working. That's frustrating. So I'll show you the footballer whilst this is loading. See, they go before day 1. So here we've got a young footballer. Came running. He was dropped from Fulham Football Club because he was only running 18 kilometers an hour. So the task was to make him run more efficient, make him stronger. We're going to show you a video of what he looked like to begin with. So that is, we can see, just watch him. There's a lot of strength that needs to be done. He's landing on his heels, on his right leg, and his right arm is going across his body. There's a few things, but those are the main things that I'm going to pick up from for now. And then if we look at the after video, so after about 20 minutes, half an hour of worked on using his arms more efficiently. So as I said, you've got to keep your arms as close to your body as possible, as that's where it's at its optimal length for the muscles to work. And you can see already we went from 18 kilometers an hour at his best to this one being 21. And again, that's just working on his arms, working on his hips. And so he begged me to run a lot faster a couple of weeks later to test his speeds. I'm going to zoom this in so we don't see myself. So I tried to keep him at a controlled pace so we can build and then increase the speed later on. So he wanted to go faster. We tested it. So if you watch this, he's using his arms better, just using his legs better, but he's also really quite choppy. So here, instead of allowing that leg to come back, everything stops here, and it's too much front side mechanics and just really choppy. He did run faster. He did run 23 kilometers an hour, but it's not where we want to be. Because, well, there you go. He couldn't hold it for that long either. And we're going to move on to 8 weeks later. So 8 weeks later, after working on a lot of those things, we got him from, so bear in mind, we had him at 80 kilometers an hour when he first started. 8 weeks later, he's now at 27.7 kilometers an hour. And this is him moving now. As you can see, his arms are working so much better, looking stronger. slow it down. As he's moving forward, you can see that his hips are moving forward. There's not a lot of cycling going on here. It's more forward of that hip, And he's also, what I forgot to mention, is that he's actually landed on the balls of his feet, which actually happened in the first session as well, where just changing the focus, using your hips, allows you to just move forward and land on the balls of your feet. And we're going to try the sprinter. Yes, it looks like it's ready. It is ready. Fantastic. So, GB sprinter, as I was saying, if you watch this is 20 kilometers an hour. Everything for me, everything's very high knees, spending way too much time up in the air, and there's not enough forward movement. So this is for 20 kilometers an hour on the first session, and then we go again working on the hips, move as you see the arrow moving forward. This again is 20 kilometers an hour. And you can see the difference in efficiency. So both 20 kilometers an hour, but you can see that there's so much less energy being used in this particular run. The arms can be better, but we're seeing that the hips are starting to work properly. We do exercises to strengthen the hips as well, and the arms. But the last bit I'm going to show you is what she looks like now. After, I can't remember how long this one was, but we'll see what she looks like at 29 kilometers an hour. And you can see even this looks a lot more effortless. Again, all we're doing, look at the weaknesses, strengthening the weaknesses. So yeah, those are the 3 examples. I'm going to hand you over to, when I can find it, hand you over to George, who's going to talk more about the biomechanics of the feet.
There we go. Thanks, Tremayne. I'm just sharing my screen. Cool. Right, so yeah, I'm just going to go through really just focusing on the feet in this instance. I know we've looked at some whole body movements and strengthening. Just very quick intro to myself. Firstly, thanks to the team at A.L.O for inviting me to speak this evening. I'm Director of Gait and Motion Technology. We provide cutting-edge biomechanics solutions to private healthcare, universities and elite sport across the UK and Ireland. Very fortunate to work quite closely with many British and world champion athletes, predominantly in marathon. Just some of the examples of individuals that I've worked with in the last couple of years here. But we have a particular technology that we provide called foot scan, and A.L.O were actually the first and still the only clinic in Harley Street to bring the technology into practice. But a traditional gait analysis tends to be quite a visual experience. So often you will have someone looking at the way you walk across the room. They might put you on a treadmill, which is very important. But one of the main limitations is it doesn't actually tell us what goes on beneath the foot. So the foot scan technology allows a clinician to be able to understand the forces, the pressures, the timings between left and right, but also put them side by side so we can actually look at the symmetry of movement. And one of the key things that we look at in foot biomechanics and gait is something called the dynamic center of pressure. And that's this little white line that you can see moving through the foot strike. The pink line separates the foot right down the middle. It's called the foot axis. And there is actually a normative path that we should look for when looking at a normal foot function. The center of pressure of the foot should start on the lateral board of the heel when the foot makes ground contact, just from a walking perspective at this moment in time. We should have that lateral to medial heel roll. The foot should then supinate in mid-stance before pronating again prior to propulsion, and we tend to push off between the first and second toes as a norm. So from a normal foot function perspective, this is what we typically tend to look for. And within the clinic at A.L.O, we can actually play this through side by side to see is there symmetry of movement. Have you got an earlier heel raise on a particular side? All things which are quite important when looking at the symmetry further up the chain. It also enables us to actually identify your foot type. Lots of people often believe they're pronated or they've got flat feet, and actually it's not always the case. So you can actually compare your motion and your foot to some specific case files as well. Now, pronation is actually a normal movement of the feet. It's only when it becomes excessive that it can become a problem. Me personally, my left foot does pronate quite a bit when I move, and historically I've had a lot of medial knee pain in the past when I used to play football. And I've had an orthotic or orthotics for the last 7 years to try and accommodate that and just support that left side in particular. But often pronation is associated with a higher medial load. So that would be coming on the inner side of the pink line. You can see here as an example of quite a heavily pronated foot. And we've got a really high loading through that first metatarsal region. The little white dots are actually placed down at set time intervals. So when they start bunching together as well, it means the individual is spending quite a lot of time there. And it's when we've got high pressure over a long period of time that can become even more of a problem. Oppositely, you may have heard the term supination, and that's when the foot is more sort of laterally loaded, which can cause different issues. And that's when we can see here, often we'll get higher pressure loading on the fifth metatarsal region. Just another visual there for you. And I know earlier Rory mentioned about things like plantar fasciitis. Now, often if someone has flat feet or high arch feet, both of which can actually contribute towards heel pain or plantar fasciitis. And that's when the plantar fascia really does stretch on the heel bone. And often that foot will look something like this. So we can't really see an arch at all. And we typically get that pressure contact throughout the entire foot strike, from ground contact through to propulsion. Oppositely to this, we can see people with high arch feet, which would look something like this, where actually you see no midfoot contact at all. This also can lead to that plantar fasciitis, but also more forefoot problems as well. You may have heard the term metatarsalgia, which is an inflammation of the metatarsal heads, or claw toes as well. But often we don't actually fully understand this about an individual until we can assess them properly and really see what's going on beneath the foot. When talking about stability, on the left-hand side of the screen is what we would consider a stable foot strike, where we've got that good center of pressure that I've mentioned, versus on the right-hand side, we can see we've got instability of that center of pressure line. It's changing direction quite sharply and spending a lot of time in this particular area, and they've also got high pressures. So these are all things that we can actually pick up and see what's going on beneath the foot. The thing about footwear as well is it is a one-size-fits-all approach. They're not custom to you, they're the same on the left and right. And often people have asymmetry in not just their foot type, but their foot function as well. And we can see here an example from a flat foot all the way through to an extremely high arch foot, and a few examples in between really. But bearing in mind that shoe typically is going to be the same on both sides. It's not necessarily going to accommodate for everyone. So this is where we then look to try and customize the footwear from orthotic intervention. Particularly, and I'm not saying orthotics are for everyone, that's absolutely not the case, but particularly if someone is experiencing foot, lower limb issues and persistent pain, particularly when they run, it's often good to come in for an assessment and really get to the bottom of, okay, what might be contributing towards that? And then your clinician can advise accordingly whether that is strengthening exercises or if in fact an orthotic intervention would be beneficial. It's often these structural abnormalities that do lead to the pain and problems. So that could be in the forefoot. We have forefoot varus or forefoot valgus foot types. And again, I've got a little pressure printout here as well. So this top one is forefoot varus. And typically the forefoot is more sort of, well, we say inverted relative to the rear foot. Often that means we're not really using the first metatarsal head as well as we should, and we can often have more higher pressure on the lateral border. Oppositely, a forefoot valgus will tend to really load that first metatarsal head, and that center of pressure can come in quite sharply. Now, forefoot valgus is exactly what I have personally on the left-hand side. So I have an orthotic intervention with a higher medial arch support to try and control that, and in turn knock that center of pressure more laterally to reduce some of this load through the first metatarsal region. Those abnormalities can also stem at the rear foot, and it's really common with these rear foot abnormalities to lead to issues further up the chain. Again, that could be rear foot varus, where we're loading more laterally, or rear foot varus, where we're loading more medially. If we take the rear foot valgus here at the bottom, we've got that increased medial load, for instance. If you imagine a foot really collapsing in and a high medial load, that's in turn going to internally rotate that knee on that right hand side, which is then going to actually drop the pelvis slightly. So a slight structural abnormality at the rear foot can lead to that knee pain, hip, even lower back pain. So often we have that head to toe approach where we can really understand, okay, this is what's going on further up the chain in terms of our strength and our movement, but actually this is what's going on beneath the foot and potentially contributing towards that pain that you might be experiencing. So from an orthotic point of view, many people might have had orthotics in the past, whether that's from the NHS, whether it's from a retail shop, like an off-the-shelf device. But the team at A.L.O have really sort of onboarded with the innovative way of thinking. So if I just go through what a traditional orthotic prescription is like, what people are most familiar with is casting the foot or a foam impression box, or more recently a static scanner, and all of those are very static in their nature. All it really gives you is a shape of someone's foot, nothing really about the movement or the function. And that then very much relies on a clinician to look and eyeball and make an educated guess about what's going on really, and they'll put that onto a paper prescription, and then the devices will be handmade. Often those materials are things like plastic or carbon or EVA are some of the more popular ones. But all of those traditional devices are one density throughout. Polypropylene is the most common. And what that means is ultimately you're just getting a shell, the shape of your foot. Now, in the last, well, actually in 2018, we launched the FITS 3D printed orthotics, which is a huge step forward in underfoot technology. They are a world first in respect that the devices are both 3D printed and designed using dynamic data. So we assess an individual using the foot scan technology to understand exactly what's going on, and that data translates directly into your prescription. So the orthotics are not only just the shape of someone's foot, they are based on how you move. So we can actually accommodate for those structural abnormalities or those asymmetries in pressure and loading that are actually taking place beneath the foot. And this has been a huge jump on in accuracy. They're accurate to the nearest 0.1 of a millimeter, and 3D print is extremely lightweight as well. If you're ever in clinic, do pick up one of the samples that they'll have laying around and you'll see what I mean. I'm just going to go through 2 case files just to really take you through how we can translate your data into something specific to you to really optimize the way your foot moves. So following an assessment on foot scan, we get a range of visual analysis screens. This first one here is called 2D, and we can play this through live in the software, but ultimately this is showing us the dynamic center of pressure, where the peak pressure is going, and we can also look at the timing. And we can see this individual here has an increased pressure through their medial heel on the right-hand side, also through their first and second metatarsal heads, and actually the peak pressure is going through the big toe. They've got something called hallux rigidus, which is a really stiff big toe joint and a high pressure going through there. And we can see that really clearly from the 3D analysis, where we can ultimately see the peak pressures in the dynamic foot strike. At a much deeper level, your clinician's actually able to really understand the dynamic force through the 10 key areas of the foot. Now, lots of injuries stem from lack of control at the rear foot, often that rear foot valgus or varus, as I mentioned. Now, if we look at the heel here, we've got the pink as the medial heel and the blue as the lateral heel. And ideally, if we're looking at a heel strike, we should see relatively equal loading between the medial and lateral border. So that left heel is a good example, versus the right heel, not so much. We can see quite a discrepancy here between the medial and lateral border, as you could see there on the previous screens as well. The system is also validated to predict the risk of lower limb injury. There's over 3,000 research papers backing the technology. Now, this isn't going to diagnose an injury, but it's going to say, based on your movement and the dynamic loading for your feet, there is a higher level of risk of problem, and this is where it's stemming from. So that links quite nicely to the data as well. Now, what makes this extremely unique in an orthotic perspective is, as I mentioned, we directly translate that data into the design. So various calculations are made for you based on your movement patterns. So based on your weight and the loading that goes through your feet, it will suggest the thickness and density of the top layer that goes on top of the 3D printed device. Also, the level of navicular support in the medial arch can vary. Now, often if you buy an off-the-shelf cheap insole from a shop, it literally is the same on both sides. It's not bespoke to you. It may do a job, but if you have asymmetry in your arch height or your midfoot control, then that's not going to be the optimal solution for you. We can see for this individual here that it suggested that the right side is slightly flatter, so it's going to have a slightly lower medial arch. With 3D print as well, we have something called stiffness direction. So we can actually print a device in a certain direction so it can flex one way and not another. Now, typically, if your feet are very neutral in their pattern, the stiffness direction will be relatively neutral and those lines will run parallel. If the foot's more pronated, it will print in a positive direction. More supinated, it will print in a lateral direction. And that will really try and optimize the movement within a really streamlined shell. It will also suggest any level of rear foot control that might be required. And we can see here for this individual, it suggests a neutral heel on the left, but a 2-degree medial rear foot post on the right-hand side. Now we can see here that the right heel does collapse in. Now a medial heel wedge will actually help to control that rear foot and start that center of pressure off in a more stable position, which in turn is probably going to reduce some of this medial pressure experience further forward in the foot. Again, that's something that's calculated based on your individual data. And another unique principle of 3D print is in one device, we can have a shell that is totally flexible in certain areas, or it can be totally rigid as well, on a scale of flexible to stiff. Now, based on your loading and the force going through your feet, it will suggest, okay, this part needs to be more rigid, but this part could be more flexible because we don't need as much support there. Alongside these calculated parameters, the clinical team can also make any additional recommendations. So if they have identified that you may have plantar fasciitis or metatarsalgia, they can really fine-tune your devices so that they're specific to you. Another really common thing, Achilles tendonitis, a clinician can add in something like a heel raise. So they raise it slightly to take some load off that posterior chain and reduce that stress that you might be experiencing when you move. A second example, here we have an individual who's got a very asymmetrical movement pattern. You can see the left foot, they've got a really high load through the first metatarsal head, really collapsing in. The right side, very opposite, not really loading the first metatarsal head. Now, of course, if they're walking and running in their shoes, which is a one-size-fits-all, that is not going to accommodate these asymmetries. So we can actually start to fine-tune that. We can see it really clearly there from the 3D analysis. We can see a huge load going through the first metatarsal head here on that left-hand side. And it's highly likely that individual would be experiencing some sort of pain. But even if they're not, that's something that we would look to try and offset and redistribute elsewhere, because inevitably over time, that is going to lead to an increased risk of something like a stress fracture or pain in that area. And of course, we can see the risk analysis again is really highlighting that medial forefoot on the left-hand side. For this individual, we've got some totally opposite corrections going on. Now, of course, we've got the top cover thickness and hardness, but really wanting to focus it on the stiffness direction here and the local stiffness. We can see the left side 26 degrees, the right side -12. So two totally opposite things in that prescription. The left side, by printing in a really positive direction, is going to create a torsional stiffness to prevent that foot collapsing in and encourage a foot more towards a supinated position. It's not going to hugely shift it across, but it's really going to restrict that overpronation on the left-hand side. Versus the right side printing in a negative direction, the device is going to have a flex towards pronation. So it's going to encourage the movement through that first metatarsal head, which is important because we can see it's not really being used here. And when we run, when we push off propulsion, it is important that we do push off between the first and second metatarsals, or the first and second toe. And also the local stiffness. Now, I'm not within my software here, so I can't hover over and show you the numbers, but hopefully you can see in terms of the blue shading that this right side has a more rigid lateral border than the left, but the left side has a more rigid medial border than the right. So we're really fine tuning those devices so they're specific, not only to the patient's feet, but the movement and the forces that go through the feet during movement. Now I could go on for hours about feet and orthotic prescription, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into how we can take that analysis one step further to really get to the bottom of what might be causing any pain. As I said, we do work closely with multiple British and world champion athletes. Now, all of these aren't wearing orthotics because they are injured as such, or they have problems. Foot orthotics these days are very much seen at the elite level, almost as part of the kit, because we try and optimize the way the foot works to improve the stability and redistribute any of those excessive loads. It's really important for runners to minimize injury risk, and I know that's the basis of this presentation. But if we can keep you running longer and pain-free, then job done. And we can cover the 3D printed shell with a material called D3O, which is the world leader in impact protection. It's really popular from an orthotic perspective, because not only will it reduce the load going through the feet, but it also has an energy return property, which actually helps with that propulsion and moving you forwards. I think that's me for 10 minutes. So I'll pass on to the next person. But if there's any questions, by all means, pop them in the chat and I'm more than happy to answer any.
Perfect. Thank you for that, George. Really insightful. Again, so that's kind of the end of our webinar. Like I said at the beginning, we've got a little offer for you at the end of the presentation. So here it is. What we want to do is at A.L.O, we want to cover the cost of a foot scan assessment for you guys when you book in for your valve screening. Not only will you get a better understanding of your strengths, weaknesses, asymmetries, and training requirements, as we covered in the presentation, but as a treatment from us, you'll also get insight into your foot biomechanics and understanding any potential risk, as George has covered. This is a limited time offer, and we're only running this promotion for 6 weeks. So I encourage you to take advantage of the special offer and get in contact with us on the details, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. As a bonus to this, we're also going to give you 10% discount on any custom orthotics within that 6-week period. And again, very generous. In addition to this, we're going to offer a 15-minute free discovery visit with our running coach, Tremayne. So if you're struggling with running technique, or you want to improve your time, but you don't know how, or you feel like you're not as efficient as possible, he'll be able to discuss with you any concerns and let you know if he can help you move towards your goals. So like I said, don't miss out. Book your VAS screen or running coach discovery visit on the details below. So just email us or call on 0207 636 8845. If you email or call in, just use the code A.L.O Run 22, and then that special offer will be applied for you. With that being said, we're just going to run through some questions and answers. I know we're just over time, and I apologize for the slight delay. So we'll just get on to a couple of questions and we'll be done for the evening. So the first one we've got in is, when should I fit in strength training? And I think what we'll do is, Louise covered kind of strength training. So if Louise, if you're happy to take the question.
Yeah. So research really shows that it's like 2 to 3 strength training sessions a week is optimum. But obviously, if you've got people who have a high training volume already, this can be hard. So ideally, if you can get like 2 sessions in, that's great. That's why it's really good if you can have, like, if you know your weaknesses and the specific areas you need to work on. It's really good because you're not wasting lots of time doing lots of different exercises. You're really focusing and being as efficient as you can. I just seen as well, there's someone else asked, like, when should I fit it into my program and stuff like that. So again, like, if you've got a high volume of training during the week, it can be difficult to kind of fit it in on, like, fit into sessions. So I would say avoid doing your strength training on the days where you're doing your higher intensity runs. So if you know you don't have time between your harder runs to fit in a session, maybe just adding it in when you're doing your lower intensity runs, and doing it at the end of your, so going for your run and then adding in your certain exercises at the end. So if we're doing, there's kind of a debate on when you should do it, but if you kind of think about, if we're adding in strength training, you might find your muscles are fatigued, and then you go for a run could increase your injury risk as well. So I think doing that afterwards in a more controlled environment is better. And kind of like with the same principles with your training as well, you know, gradually adding that strength training in, and not kind of overloading yourself too much too soon. And hopefully that answers the question.
Perfect. Great stuff, Louise. Thank you. So another question we've got in is it worth getting a foot scan assessment even if I don't have any pain or injuries? Very good question. And I think maybe handing over to George to answer that question.
Yeah, sure. Good question. I mean, lots of, if we take it to the elite level, most of them have it done as standard. So from early days, people like Paula Radcliffe, Mo Farah, Eilish McColgan, they would regularly travel to our lab for an analysis just to see what's going on. Is there anything that potentially could be a red flag or lead to injury? Now, I appreciate not everyone is a elite athlete, but actually it's often those that aren't elite are slightly more at risk of problems because they're not necessarily as conditioned and training as much. So yeah, I mean, in the same way that you'd go to perhaps a dentist for a checkup or an optician's, then I'm not saying you need to go every month for a checkup, but actually if you've never had one done before, it might be worth having an assessment with the team just to see, is there anything there that perhaps predispose me to injuries further down the line? We have done a lot of military research over the years as well, and as I said, the system is validated to predict the risk of injury. So perhaps something that's worth doing. But yeah, particularly if you have got pain, then I would certainly say it's worth having an assessment to get to the bottom of it. But yeah, I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you, George. So we've got another quite specific question. So I'll read it. I've just received my orthotics from my physio. I got them due to being injured during my half marathon training. When I was able, I started running again, but my physio recommended not to run with my new orthotics as the race is only 3 weeks away. So the question is that the right approach? I wear them for my day-to-day, but not for running. Okay, I think that's a very good question. I'll go ahead and answer, to be fair. I think, again, it depends on your past medical history and the type of orthotics that your physio has provided you. So you want to break in your orthotics, and we recommend breaking them in a gradual fashion with gradual daily exposure. And I think George will kind of concur with that approach. If they're only supposed to be used for daily wear, but you picked up an injury training, I feel like your orthotics should be customized for your running trainers, and you should be using them when running. But again, you want to build that up in a gradual fashion. So my personal approach would be use them for your training build up. Again, 3 weeks is a short period of time. So maybe the time frame's not long enough, and I don't want to advise without assessing and kind of seeing you clinically. So don't take whatever I'm saying on the webinar as give a little disclaimer there. So yeah, I think everyone's slightly different, and the orthotic will be individualized to you. So I think you need to have that discussion with your own physio and see what their rationale is behind not advising you to run in your orthotics. I hope that's answered your question. If it hasn't, our email is on that last page on the presentation. Just email us and kind of, we can have the 15-minute discovery visit over the phone and have a discussion. Okay. So we've had another question in. Should I do pre-activation, or should I be doing pre-activation exercises before a run? And again, I think Tremayne, as our running coach, might be a good person to go to on this one. Tremayne, are you happy to take that question?
Sorry, what was the question? I was reading the other question.
Should I be doing pre-activation exercises before a run?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it depends on what you need. So I wouldn't just say do any activation. It has to be specific to what you need, because if one certain muscle is already overactive, you could be making it more active. But definitely, I would suggest to do certain activations specific to you, so that you can recondition the muscles to do what it is you want them to do. I think that's the best way to answer that. So yes, but it depends on what activations you're doing, because you might be overactivating your muscles.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And again, I think everyone's individual, right? So it needs to be tailored to you.
It needs to be tailored to you, yeah.
Perfect. Okay. We'll run through a couple more questions. So we'll do 3 more questions. And then if we haven't answered your question, we'll endeavor to reply via email. We've got your name so we can get back to you individually on it. Okay. So when using orthotics in sports, would you give them a period of time to accommodate with them? Or would you recommend to wear them straight away? I think going to Georgia on that one would be appropriate.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so certainly don't just put them in your shoes and just go running straight away. That would be a bad idea. Every pair of 3D printed orthotics we prescribe come in a box with instructions on wearing them inappropriately. So we start by saying build up for daily use. So for instance, hour on day 1, 2 hours on day 2, days 3 and 4, perhaps 4 hours plus. And by day 5, just see how you feel with them. And that's just day-to-day walking before you even start any sports or running. After you've done the daily use sort of protocol that we recommend, we then say you can build up the athletics use. So first time round, half-hour warm-up, days 2 and 3, puts up to an hour. It is really a case-by-case basis, but typically it is like a 2-week wearing period. Some people, it might take up to 6 weeks for them to feel like they should be there, because if you've got quite a lot of asymmetry in your movement patterns and you're not used to having that extra support, it can feel a little bit weird at first, but that's because it's giving you a bit more control and you'll be using certain muscles more perhaps than you ever have done. But you've got to rest assured that that's there for a reason to help correct what your feet are doing. But yeah, in short, definitely follow any recommendations that you're provided in terms of wearing them in, and don't just go on a mad run. Having said that, the vast majority of feedback we get from patients is they do feel extremely comfy on day 1, but I would still recommend, even if they do, just to follow the guidelines.
Perfect. Okay. Great stuff. Thank you, George. Okay, so 2 more questions to go. If an athlete has a bad running form, but at the same time he or she is fast, is it possible to change his or her running mechanics? I think Tremayne, maybe jump in and answer.
Yeah. So even though the athlete is fast, you will always want to try to get those extra hundredths, extra tenths, whatever it is. So yes, you can improve the mechanics. There are a few examples. I think maybe Dina Asher-Smith might be a good example, where when she was younger, she had a certain style. She was very, if I'm correct, leaning very forward. So the changes that you make might be very minimal, because if they're already fast, it works for them. So you don't want to completely scrap everything and try to start from afresh, because they're already working, they're already moving fast. But with Dina, it may be very small technical changes, but it's made her even faster. So yes, you do change things, you improve things, but you don't completely scrap everything and start again, because what they're doing works for them, and the muscles that are functioning well. If you start, what you want to do is change things so that things are more efficient and less likely to get injured. So yes, you do, but not too much, because it's working for them.
Okay, I think that answers the question appropriately. Tremayne, whilst you're there, we'll go on to the next question because it's about running mechanics again. So it's probably appropriate you answer again. The question is, how long does it take on average for someone to see changes in running mechanics?
It depends on the person for one. As you've seen in some of the examples that I've given, I've changed some people within one session, but for it to become more natural, it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks, I reckon, for it to become more natural. Maybe even longer, depending on the person. So what I would say is, yes, it can. If you change your focus, you will see a difference, and then you just need to become stronger in those particular areas and just keep building on it. There's no real time frame as to. There's no real time frame. It depends on the person. Is my answer. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, guys. What we'll do is I'm going to thank the speakers again. So thank you, George, Tremayne, Rory, and Louise. Thanks for everyone attending. What we'll do is we'll wrap it up there, and we'll get back to the guys that we haven't answered via email. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.